And welcome back. Thank you for staying with us, and it's time for our conversation on Monday special. My guest to my immediate right is Bishop Alfred Rutich. He is Bishop Emeritus of the Military Ordinariate. Next to him is Steve Ogola, a city lawyer. To my left is Mugo Kibati. He's the former Director General of Vision 2030. And next to him, Macharia Gaido, an independent journalist. And you are all welcome to the program. Thank you for coming in tonight. Steve, let me start with you. You know, despite the victory that we have seen today, the upholding of the president-elect's re-election, part of the country celebrating, part of it is disgruntled, and adding to this is the fact that we have seen, at least according to our reports, 2 people killed. Where does that leave Kenya today?
Well, thank you, Anne. It just tells us that the election dispute resolution process has not resolved everything, and that there is need to deal with the issues that were not resolved in the court. So it would be naive to think that because the court has made a determination, we move forward without attending to the other issues that could not be resolved in court. But it also means that after this, the close of the electoral dispute resolution process, that all the solutions we are looking for must be anchored within the framework provided for under the Constitution.
What are your thoughts in terms of today's judgment, and what will you be looking out for when the full judgment is given in 21 days?
I think for me, it's important to say that I'm an enthusiastic believer in the rule of law. The rule of law also requires us that we accept the bindingness of the Supreme Court judgment. So I do not anticipate a delegitimization of that Supreme Court judgment. We can expect a serious, a detailed judgment that matches partly the decision given on 1st of September, which nullified the other election, to tell us that the new shifts that the court has seen, which was not necessarily which may not have been seen by many, because when an election petition is filed, it could go either way. And we should be able to trust the wisdom of the judges, because in terms of the hierarchical order of interpretation of the Constitution, and the judiciary, especially the apex court, the Supreme Court, they have a detailed and deeper understanding of the law and the legal environment in which Kenya conducted the election. So if they say that the elections met the threshold under the Constitution, we can't doubt it. It's like saying that when the alligator comes out of the water and tells you the crocodile is unwell, you can't doubt it because you don't live in the water. So when the court that is bestowed with the responsibility of interpreting the Constitution definitively comes out and tells us that in the assessment, the election meets the threshold, we can expect that they will demonstrate how that threshold was met. Meanwhile, I believe that the discussion and debate should move away from what was contested in the court to the other issues that are very important and pertinent, but were not addressed in the court. I think that would be a better approach within the framework set out in the Constitution. And
we'll get to that in this program. Bishop, you know, some people are saying the fact that it was a unanimous decision has in a way served to lower things like speculation, and in a way serves to put the country on better footing to unite. Is that your perspective?
Well, he has explained that the resolution that was expected in the court, and the court came out to say that it had no merit, that also touches the heart and the mind. And my perspective is that Kenyans have been waiting for this moment, and now that has been proclaimed by the court. Therefore, now, what is the way forward? Because there are some people in this country that are jubilating, dancing on the street, and there are some who are mourning. But that should not last long. I think we need to come around the table together and say, what is the way forward? And the way forward is now the subject that we must lay on the table. The issues about, we have been talking about how to be cohesive and integration. And to do that, we must have a sober mind in order to adjudicate what are the issues that keep on bubbling during elections.
Right.
And I think this is a moment now. We want to seize that moment. To become sad after election is given, because you see people running on the race, and some will win, some will be defeated, but it is within the same courtyard, and that is the country. So we need now to ask for sobriety, and we keep on saying that so that we can discuss a number of issues and solve them.
Okay, and we'll get to the detail of the issues shortly. You know, Mugo, there are those who are saying, forget the politics, this is a win for Kenya. A win, why? Because politically we were courting instability. Economically, who knows, you know, where the shilling would have gone if the electoral period persisted. Is that your perspective? Is this a win for Kenya?
Well, I think, Anne, it is a win for Kenya in that we have collectively been able to see through the legal processes right to the conclusion today. And I think that is an important precursor to anything else that we do. I think today one can say that the fact that the Apex Court, as Steve said, has made a ruling and a decision, and as you said, unanimously, is important because it completes the legal process and allows us to proceed to the next stage of our lives as Kenyans. However, I think, as Steve said, it is important that this must be seen as an important precursor. There is still a political discussion that needs to be held. We need to now engage in a national conversation that begins to address some of the passions and emotions that the bishop has spoken to. How can we be able every 5 years to go into these elections and see them merely as a process by which we select the leaders who will lead us for the next 5 years, and no more than that. And also that we must recall that elections, the selection of leaders, are not an end in and of themselves. They are a means to an end. We select presidents, we select leaders so they can do certain things for us. That's why they get a mandate to do certain things for us, and the things that they are meant to do for the citizenry of the country must be paramount. Far too often we put too much into who becomes president and why they become president, and we collectively as communities associate ourselves with individuals who have merely been elected to lead all of us. So today I want to add that it's a win for Kenya on 2 counts. One, I have mentioned the legal process, and I think we must commend the Supreme Court that has, in my view, conducted itself with dignity and calm under very trying and difficult circumstances to the conclusion that they gave us today. But it is also a win for Kenya because we now have a leader, a president-elect who will be commander-in-chief once he's sworn in, head of government and head of state, that will now allow us to deal with the real issues that cause us to go to this election: the economy, jobs, issues that I think Steve speaks to often about ensuring that the constitution is properly implemented, strengthening devolution. Those are the real issues that cause us to go for elections, and we must remember that. And so for that reason, it is a win that we now are able to go into that phase now.
Macharia, your perspective?
It is a win only to a limited extent. I think it would be very short-sighted to call it a win for Kenya simply on the basis that a legal matter has been resolved. But this is not a legal matter anymore. We are talking about a serious political, social, and economic crisis that plagues this nation and inflames electoral violence every 5 years. Until we recognize that, we have actually achieved nothing. Because these issues, of course, were not out within the remit of the Supreme Court, and they have not been addressed. The danger now is that one side will take it that they have won, that they have power, that they're in charge, and we have seen the arrogance of power. And we have seen a tendency to dictatorship, and we have seen a tendency to say that we hold the reins of power, we can do what we want, we can change the laws the way we want, we can change the constitution, we can unleash the police force, and we can even unleash something called the Nairobi business community. Now, if that is the attitude which is going to shape the thinking of President Kenyatta and Deputy President William Ruto, then we are in trouble. Unless they can be humble, unless they can accept this victory with a dose of magnanimity, unless they can take the lead in handing out the hand of reconciliation, we are getting nowhere. Because unless we resolve these issues now, unless we grab this opportunity now, we are headed for a worse crisis 5 years down the road. We have not resolved much. We have resolved simply a legal conundrum. We have not resolved very serious social, political, and economic issues.
So let's
don't forget that we approached this election with a dispute even over how it should be held. One side does not participate. One side feels that this government does not represent them. If President Uhuru takes it that he is president of Jubilee rather than president of Kenya, then we are in trouble.
And so when the Jubilee political side says, you know, we need to be very sure about what it is we're talking about, and that the important thing to happen now is for the opposition to recognize a loss that has been, how can I put it, cemented, if you like, by the court's findings. And so we're not going to talk about Nusum Kate and sharing positions. We can talk about, you know, other things, nation building, etc. What do you mean by that?
There will always be room for dialogue. And this dialogue does not have to be premised on Nusum Kate or power sharing. Our problems are bigger than an office for Raila or an office for Uhuru. That is not, this Nusum Kate is not the issue. The issue is the problems which afflict us. We went into Nusum Kate in 2007, 2008. That was a temporary fix because we did not resolve the problems. We got a new constitution. We did not resolve the problems. Now we have Uhuru and Ruto from 2013 sharing a government. It is also a power sharing arrangement. It is also a Nusum Kate. Let nobody deceive you. It has not resolved the problems because we know that the flashpoints of violence is not just what might happen in Kibera or Huruma or Kondele in Kisumu, but the Rift Valley problem. It has not been resolved. An accommodation, a power sharing arrangement between Uhuru and Ruto is not a resolution of the problem.
And that's an interesting perspective, that in itself is a Nusum Kate. But let's talk about what the problems are, and I'll just pose that as an open question to you all. So Macharia has classed them as socio-political and economic issues that lead us to violence every 5 or so years. So what are they to you, and if you could be specific?
I think the Constitution rests on 3 pillars, and some of those pillars can address the issues Macharia is speaking to. The first pillar is inclusiveness. And the second one is transparency, and the third one is accountability. In terms of inclusiveness, the design in the Constitution is that persons, the marginalized groups, the youth and the women feel included. So I'd hope that in this term, if President Uhuru cares for his legacy, for instance, the 2/3 gender principle be addressed. In terms of transparency, Article 10 requires public participation. Every step of the way. Let him have an approach that involves the people. And in terms of accountability, the quest for an improved technical government is what takes Kenyans to court. And let us not delegitimize anybody who goes to court, including the petitioners in this matter.
What do you mean by that, an improved technical
meaning that this time you don't govern, under the new constitution, don't govern based on personal discretion or passion or use of arbitrariness, but you govern in a manner that requires a consultative, deliberative, and negotiated approach. That is what public participation is under Article 10. If the government of the day captures this and privileges an approach that captures, is my government truly inclusive? Does it reflect the face of the country? Are the marginalized groups represented, persons with disabilities, the youth and women? In terms of transparency, whatever I'm doing as government, is it verifiable every step of the way? In terms of accountability, can I be held accountable for my action? Can I go out there and explain the programs and policies my government is implementing? Do people have feedback? I think those issues must be captured. And if we do that, it will lower tension. And most critically, I think we have not done very well in terms of demystifying the presidency. And it is not true that the presidency before 2010 is the presidency post-2010. For sure, truth be said, under the Constitution, the president, especially Uhuru Kenyatta, because it started proper in 2013, the power has been dispersed significantly, and even resources. Now he's sharing resources. 40% he is coming to the counties, That is the resource that remained at the national level. Horizontally is sharing power with a more reinvigorated parliament and an independent judiciary and constitutional commissions. Surely the levels of oversight, checks and balances are significantly improved. It is not true that if Uhuru Kenyatta is president, then a certain region will benefit. That is not the intended purpose. If we communicate
and yet we consistently find ourselves in that circle. But I suppose a lot of what I'm hearing you, Steve, is also something that can just be the prerogative of the president to do without necessarily even entering into dialogue. Like, you can do it. We don't need to talk about it. You can do it. Okay, fine. Bishop, what is it then that you think, because there have been a lot of calls for national dialogue, you yourself have said there should be national dialogue. What then requires dialogue on?
Corruption. Corruption is a disease. Okay. Treat it. We have for a long time been diagnosing, and we know the problem of corruption is that, and I have a formula which I came up with by reading it many years ago, that C equals to M plus D minus A, meaning C for corruption equals to monopoly plus discretion minus accountability. So if we can use a formula, yes, if we can use a formula and show accountability in all that we do, then the levels of corruption will be really lowered to the level that we can be able to say that this country, by Transparency International, they will say that Kenya is starting in terms of fighting corruption.
Could you say that formula again?
C equals corruption, M is monopoly, D is discretion, A is accountability. So if you are bent to corruption, then you have the monopoly, you have the discretion, but you are not answerable to anybody.
Wow, incredible. Do you think we need to go into talks, Mugo, and what are we talking about?
No, absolutely. I think Macharia is right. I think that's the point I was trying to make, exactly, that we have come to a conclusion of the legal process, but by no means a political one. And I think it's important to understand that the legal process, as far as the election is concerned, having reached the apex court of the land, is complete. You know, we do have to have a basis for coexisting. And it may not be perfect. No constitution is perfect, which is why I think that we need to go into dialogue, and therefore the constitution that prevails today is the one that we must follow. Otherwise, there's no order, there's no basis for coexistence. That has been the way human beings have lived the world over ever since the idea of a social contract was brought about by the likes of John Locke 400 years ago, because we as 45 million Kenyans have our own individual desires, communal desires, family desires, and they don't always coincide. We must find a way of living together. Right. And that is why dialogue will always be important. And I think it is provided for in the Constitution. The American Constitution has been amended several times in the last 200 years, and ours can be. Again, to Steve's point,
so what would you amend in the Constitution?
We fought 20 years to come to the current constitution, so we cannot just willy-nilly amend it. Everything we do must be enshrined within it. However, I think when we find that there is a kind of angst that exists today, and I think we must admit that there is angst, we should not have a situation where after an election such, after a verdict as there was today, one side of the country is completely ecstatic and the other side completely despondent. It is not healthy. We must address what is underlying the root cause for that.
What is it
and I think it is important that we do not always frame it as addressing Raila's problems or Uhuru's problems. I happen to have a healthy respect, in fact a healthier respect for elected leaders than they seem to have for themselves. They call each other names, because I feel that if you have both of them represent millions of people. Those millions of people have a reason why they follow Uhuru and they follow Raila. And to the extent that there is despondence, we must address it. I think some of the reasons, the issue of inclusion, I think a dignified opposition. I think I've spoken to this before, that we need to actually have a strengthened opposition in this country that is dignified, that has the capacity to hold the government, the executive, to account on the issues of corruption or the economy or the extent to which the constitution is being executed to account. I also think that devolution needs to be strengthened. I hear what Steve says about the fact that the presidency has been demystified, but I think it is to strengthen devolution even more, such that the national government has no discretion, for instance, to turn off the taps. Like we've seen happening. And those are some of the reasons why people sometimes say, you know what, it isn't good enough. We still need the top office. But if that devolution was enshrined as completely independent, however, that must also be accompanied by better oversight of the devolved units of the national government. So we should all not be hounding the Auditor General. We should be strengthening the office of the Auditor General so that that accountability that the Bishop is talking about can be made easier. Some of the things going in government are too intricate, too esoteric for the general public. But the strengthened office of Auditor General, bring out these issues in a manner and which it can be debated and which people can be held to account. Then these are the issues that I was saying earlier cause us to elect leaders. These are the issues that affect our lives. It is not a matter of whether it is Mugo or Steve or Macharia who have been elected president. It is they have been elected president for a particular reason that affects myself, my children, and all of us as Kenyans. So I think it is important that one, inclusivity, two, a dignified opposition, three, strengthen devolution with better oversight because it's our resources. And I think now that we are where we are today, to whom much is given, it is said, much is required. And I think the president, in my view, now that the president-elect, now that he has been affirmed as the president-elect, when he's sworn in next week, will have a higher responsibility to reach out, because he is the president, to help us address this issue, whether it is by his own prerogative or by reaching out. And I think reaching out will be important to the other side in a real, meaningful manner that is respectful, to listen to what the grievances are. And I think I'll finish by saying that leaders, at any level, whether as bishops or CEOs, have to use EQ, emotional intelligence, over and above your normal IQ. And far too often I see IQ being applied. Oh, we've built roads, we've listened to you. No, people also want to be helped and for development to be brought to them in a respectful manner. And it matters. And therefore I think going forward, this is what I think I will expect of the president-elect. Okay, so it's something there to talk about, reaching out and reaching out respectfully. And is that not what has been happening? Has development not been done in a respectful manner? It's quite something to ponder about, because you can think just bring the road and that's good. I'll just say one quickly. Perceptions matter. Sometimes, I in my own experience have seen that I have thought I have done things where I have been a leader in institutions where I am sure that I have done things respectfully. But if the recipient does not perceive it to be respectful, then it matters, no matter what I think myself as a giver. Interesting. Macharia, I know you may want to contribute on what needs to be on the table, but I'd like to shift you to what needs to be on the table politically and emerge from this. We've had this conversation, over the last 2 or so months, about the NASA leader Raila Odinga coming out of the election and the first petition having political and legal capital, and many pundits opined that, he must spend it. Have the tables then completely turned for you? Is the president-elect now the one emerging with political and legal capital? And how does he spend it in the context of what needs to be on the table?
Obviously, the president now appears to have won an upper hand. Whether he wins legitimacy is another thing altogether, because that matters. Legitimacy is not in the eyes of the law, but in the eyes of the general populace, and in the not just Jubilee zones, but nationally. That matters. And how he handles this thing will matter. Of course, he will, of course, be reacting somehow to whatever Raila and his group do. Raila has said he is not recognizing the president. And they are going ahead with the formation of people's assemblies and whatever other formations they can, which are designed to put pressure to fight their cause. And those are all legitimate. They're not illegal or anything.
Other than the High Court ruling today, decision on the People's Assemblies that has halted it. I think that's news that has just come in. There's a High Court decision on the same, but go ahead.
But you know, I think maybe, I was not aware of that one, but I would say it is a wrong decision.
No,
because you can, there is something called freedom of speech and association and everything else. From 1997 onwards, when the Moi regime proved very recalcitrant, it was citizens who came up through the Fungomano process and were on the verge of setting up alternate assemblies. And that is when Moi realized, hey, if I don't jump onto this boat, even the opposition parties were not there. It was civil society and churches.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing illegal with that. And even if today, we as business community, religious community, civil society, professional associations decided that the political classes are not helping, there is nothing legally to stop us setting up our own assemblies. Call it whatever you want.
Yeah, and let me just clarify this, that they have temporarily stopped those debates. Temporarily stopped those debates. I suppose
I don't see how you can stop a debate.
Well, we'll see how
I've not read the ruling. I'm hearing of it now. But I honestly do not see how any court can stop discussion on anything under the sun.
So let me just center you back now to the legal and political capital that the president would have. And so politically, what needs to happen? I mean, we've talked about the reaching out, him needing very much to be the one who leads that in a respectful manner, as Muga has also alluded to. How else do you see him spending political capital? And because you have responded, including the issue of legitimacy, you feel the legitimacy question is not resolved. How can he resolve it when the court has made its decision and those who went to the ballot also made their decision?
And that is why now it is important to reach out to Kenyans, not just to Raila. And this is what I keep saying. It is not about Raila and Uhuru. It is about Kenyans. He has to come out and show that he is president of all Kenya and not president of Jubilee or president of Central Kenya and Rift Valley. And other areas which may have supported Jubilee. And that only he can do. But still there is much more which needs to be done. He needs to rein in some of these loudmouths around him. Seriously.
I'm tempted to ask who you are referring to.
Let me not go into names, but we see them all over the place. On the political sphere, in parliament, on social media. They have to be tamed. But same for Raila. If Raila wants to push a legitimate cause, then he also has a certain responsibility. He also has a certain responsibility, because I think it has to be clear that he is not just pushing for a seat at the table, but he is genuinely pushing for an all-inclusive, accommodative, system.
Right.
But he is genuinely pushing for reform for Kenya, and not for advantage of his own position or of NASA.
And speaking of the NASA leader, I mean, his choice of destination today, Tanzania, comes at a time of political uncertainty here at home, and when we have a frosty relationship between Nairobi and Dodoma. Should one read anything into that, Steve?
Well, we shouldn't, and the reason is Tanzania is well aware about the international law that governs relations between states, that you do not interfere with the domestic affairs of a state. So it would be discourteous and improper for Tanzania to comment in a manner that raises tension or agitation on Kenyan politics. So I would just view it for what it is, a visit, for whatever reason, maybe private, most likely private. And I know Kenya and Tanzania have come a long way, and they would want to respect those boundaries because Tanzania has their own challenges that Kenya is also not allowed to comment on in a manner that is not supportive or facilitative. So I don't think I would read much into it for now.
But speaking of which, internationally, and this is open to all of you, how much is international recognition of this administration going to be critical in, cementing that support, if you like, legitimacy, perhaps even in the current administration?
Maybe I can put it, and some bring the idea brought by Kibati and Gaido, issue about emotional equation and also reaching out. Kenya is endowed with bright people, but we don't have a heart. And yet the heart is the center of emotion, the center of our decision, the center of all the resources. The heart is what cement a country. That is what we call cohesion, is the heart. We have a bright people, but we lack the heart. And therefore, if we are calling for international recognition, or even it's the heart that they support. They support in the sense of encouragement, of looking at issues that we are grappling with without entering into the kitchen when we were cooking, but used to form a ring of brothers and sisters who collaborate with us. But we must have the gist of the matter must be discussed by Kenyans. And therefore, I call for more understanding. I have called for more compassionate. I call for more sympathetic and more empathy than sympathy, so that we can run the issue about relationship, because international relationships is about a heart to heart. That is why when they come, they say cordial relationship. They're referring to the heart.
That's interesting. Mugo, you know, one side of the political divide, NASA has been very clear that, you know, at the last, you know, the August 8th election, that the international community was too quick to rubber stamp a process that they did not fully understand. Here we are now with a court confirming, you know, an October 26th election that the opposition does not even recognize took place. And so, you know, we hear from some of their quarters saying, you know what, we weren't putting too much capital on what the court would or would not say, because to our, you know, view, it didn't happen in the first place. What is the position of the international, what should their position be? And do you think it helps, you know, give legitimacy? Does it complicate the matter? I mean, to what extent would accepting this Supreme Court decision, sending congratulatory messages, affect politics at home?
Frankly speaking, I don't think very much. I think it's important that, you know, international law is such that they don't have much option. I think the protocols of international law are such that countries have to respect the system, the legal systems and processes of each other. And they cannot endorse partisan positions. And the fact that the Supreme Court, which is constitutionally mandated to make the decision that was made today, has made that decision, I think leaves little option for international actors to, you know, to do what they need to do. Having said that, is it important? Yes, because I think we need to keep our international friends close to us. But I think the issue of political legitimacy, to which Macharia refers, is something we must deal with ourselves as Kenyans. It is something that the political leadership in this country must address between themselves. The international community will follow our own lead. They cannot resolve problems on our behalf. We understand ourselves better. We know our issues. I think it will be important that that political discussion is held. And I think, to re-emphasize what other panelists have said in this discussion today, they are individuals and leaders who represent viewpoints. In this case, there's an Uhuru Kenyatta and there's a Raila Odinga, and they tend to be lightning rods for whoever is opposing them. It is important to remember that they represent constituencies. Those constituencies have particular issues that they find that they would like to see addressed. And those constituencies are in the millions of Kenyans. And therefore we must address the issues, not so far the personal desires of the two leaders or the four leaders. And I think it behoves every leader, whether it be the president-elect, the Right Honorable Odinga, whether it be Honorable William Ruto, Honorable Kalonzo Musyoka, all of whom represent millions of people who have a stake in this country. It is their constituency that we must be wise enough to try and understand what ails these constituencies. How can we address the issues that ail them in a manner that makes sure that 5 years from now, we don't go through this process again. We cannot afford every 5 years to waste an entire year Well, it is not just, economically, by the way, this economy has lost very many jobs, but more than that, emotionally, there's been an emotional stress. There's a pall, and people are going to live less because of things like this. So I think, often, and again to the point of the rhetoric, I think it behooves all leaders to tone down the rhetoric, because their followers then pick it up, and it results in what has happened over the last few days. So I think it is important that, and I agree with Macharia, that the rhetoric is toned down. We are all Kenyans. If somebody espouses a point of view different from yours, you have a right to disagree, but disagree disagreeably. I think the Supreme Court has demonstrated that reasonable men and women can disagree agreeably. In the first decision on September 1st, we had a 4-2 ruling. Today, the same 6 men and women came up with a unanimous ruling. That is a lesson to us as Kenyans, that all these are processes, and at the end of the day, we have one country. We have nowhere else to go. If, Anne, you mess up this country, I'm sinking with you. If I mess it up, you're sinking with me.
Right.
So let's not sit back and start throwing pot shots at each other. In my view, today, you've got a verdict that some people are very happy with. They have a right to celebrate, but after the celebrations are over, they should remember that the losing side are also Kenyans who must be served by the same elected leadership. We need leadership that provides civic education. I think, Steve, you refer to civic education. That makes people understand that when I am in competition with Bishop Rotich, and I win, my side wins the argument, it is not a victory over him, it's a victory for both of us. And whatever it is that has won is for both of us, for all of us as Kenyans. And I think, therefore, at the end of the day, it is not the international community offering recognition. I think they have to do that. They have no choice. It is we ourselves as Kenyans sitting down and resolving our own issues.
Finally, Macharia, the opposition has intimated that they will be coming up with a position in about 5 days, but prior to, and that should be their formal position, but prior to that we have heard some intimate, even parallel swearing-ins for Raila Odinga. To your mind, what must the opposition think hard about right now in terms of their next move, and what next for them? What would your position be?
The opposition right now, I think, is in something of a bind. They did not participate in the repeat election. They refused to recognize the result. But that result is a reality. It cannot be changed just like that. It is a reality. And President Uhuru will be sworn in next week, and he can decide that life goes on. The thing is, what do they do? I don't think they're sure themselves. First, they said they'll pressure for a new election within 90 days. Then they changed and said they'll push for some kind of interim government over 6 months. I think they're still even trying to find their feet. The thing is that for them to remain relevant, they probably need to come out with something very strong and very dramatic. At the same time, they have to think, what will be the effect of that thing? Will it cause more instability? Will it backfire? Will it energize their base? Or will it even make its own base dissipate? I don't know what they're planning. If they do think of course, there are the people's assemblies. There's talk of an alternative swearing in. I wouldn't worry too much about any of that, because the swearing in of the president is the legal process. If they do any alternative swearing in, it is just a political gesture. But I don't think it may mean very much. The thing is, what can they do between now and the next 5 years to push the change they need to push? I think they need to look beyond, as I keep saying, they need to look beyond simply pushing for a seat at the table. To make this into a campaign for the kind of social justice that all Kenya needs.
Okay.
And I keep saying it must not be about Raila anymore. It must be about Kenyans and what is good for us. And where did we go wrong and what do we need to change? And to that extent, I say it is not just about constitutional change or creating new offices of prime minister or this and that. No. A lot of it also has to do with dialogue that looks at what, like the bishop said, what is in our hearts. Why am I expected, because of Makikuyu, to blindly follow Uhuru Kenyatta? That is nothing to do with the constitution. Or somebody else to blindly follow Raila Odinga simply because he's a Luo. Or somebody else to blindly follow William Ruto because of Kalenjin, and be prepared to fight and to kill and to die on behalf of those fellows. That is nothing to do with the constitution. There is something which is basically wrong with our own architecture as a people that we need to work on.
There's something rotten in the heart.
We missed opportunities in the past. One, for instance, was the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation process. That is something that we cannot afford now again to sweep under the carpet, because that, properly handled, would have solved a lot of issues. Not just the constitution. The constitution, we came up with a beautiful constitution. Not perfect, but a big improvement on the previous one. And it was supposed, and it has the building blocks for taking Kenya so much forward. But then we failed to live up to its spirit. And that is what the thing we have to look at.
Okay, so we have about 3 or so minutes, and I want to come around for a final round of comments. And if you'd kick us off, Steve, but also considering what is it that the opposition needs to think hard about now in terms of their next move?
Thank you, Anne. Allow me to benefit from the grace by sitting next to the bishop. The Micah 6:8 says, "Pursue justice, but let mercy be your first concern." And I pray that both NASA and Jubilee, in agitation for justice, whatever form of justice, do not antagonize Kenyans, do not antagonize key institutions of governance. Let us observe some level of civility, and let us be open to exchange ideas and also change positions so that we have a shared approach to pursue what the bishop was calling a common good. To President Uhuru Kenyatta, we talked about legality, legitimacy, and now he must also bring in the legacy issues. What is it that he cares for in this last 5 years that he must not lose sight of? I don't think he wants to leave a deeply divided country. Let him also reach out with an open heart. Magnanimity is key. Sometimes there's benefit in silence. I think all the panelists have spoken to that. React through silence. Do not necessarily react by bravado and commandeering and also brinkmanship that define the political campaign. A more gracious and calm president would do us a lot of good, even as the opposition also wears whatever they care for with humility. I think that for me would work.
Final thoughts, Bishop?
Yeah, that's what we call the heart matter.
The heart
and
matter.
Therefore, we need to feel that we are all responsible on this in upholding the right and to safeguard this nation. We need to work together. And working together, as a point from the church, we are saying, let's have constructive dialogue. And that constructive dialogue doesn't mean anything like division of labor, but listening to one another. And listening to one another so that where we are all building walls, we need to build bridges.
Okay. Hugo, final thoughts?
Well, I think is to say to the NASA side of the equation that clearly they have issues which they feel politically they would like to advance, and I think the Constitution provides means to do that. But every action they take, even as they try to excite their base, because politicians have to excite their base, they must think about the long term for the country and for themselves. I think for the president-elect, he has the upper hand, and as I said earlier on, to whom much is given, much is expected. He should read through history. There have been leaders who have done the unexpected. You know, coming to the TJRC, for instance, Richard Nixon went to China. It's called the Nixonian moment. Nixon goes to China when he, for 20 years, was an anti-China communist from the 50s and 60s. And by going to China, he changed the entire equation of the Chinese-American relationship. Today, President-elect Uhuru Kenyatta has the opportunity to change this 50-year-old truth, justice, and constitution issues by being the champion of them and making them part of his legacy. I think for both sides, it is important to tone down the rhetoric. It's important that for Jubilee supporters to realize that whenever they call Raila Odinga names, it's not so much Raila Odinga, it's a constituency he represents that feels it. For the NASA leadership, whenever they call Uhuru Kenyatta names, they should remember it's not so much Uhuru Kenyatta, it is a constituency that he represents that feels it. And that does not create the kind of conducive environment for the kind of conversation that we now need to have. So I think both sides now need to understand the moment, and this is the moment for that conversation. I cannot prejudge what the outcome will be. That's why the conversation should be there. And it should be about addressing the real issues that bedevil this country. Representing the business community, I think there are issues to do with corruption, to do with strengthening devolution, high accountability, an environment that creates more employment for people in this country that must finally be top priority, as opposed to who gets what position.
Macharia.
Thank you. You know, between Friday and today, I think about 10 people have died, maybe 10, 12. That adds to maybe another 40 or 50, which have died since August 8. That's unacceptable. Nobody here knows the name of any of those people. None of those people is an Odinga. None of them is an Kenyatta. None of them is a cousin, a son, a nephew, a brother, a sister of those families.
It's just everyday people.
None of them live in Muthaiga or State House or Karen.
Yeah.
You know, as Kenyans, let's think about that. Who are these people who are dying? The thing is that they are simply expendable cannon fodder. And that's what we all are. And I think it's time we as Kenyans said, wait a minute, what are we fighting for? And even as we go into this dialogue, I think it is time, if the politicians become recalcitrant, I think it is time we revived initiatives outside the political sphere to force through dialogue. These things were going on before the disputed election, or before the repeat election. They were going on before the August 8 election.
Right.
Along the way, the efforts to forge a common front came to a halt. But I think all is not lost. I think now is the time to revive those things.
A kind of citizens movement.
A citizens movement outside control of the political players. Because that probably is what can bring sense into this, rather than politicians who will always be clashing heads.
Wow. You should watch Opinion Court on Thursday. I'm just going to leave it there. I thank you all for coming. I thank you all for your views. Do we have time for tweets? We do not, unfortunately, but thank you so much for sending in your feedback. We'll be reading them once the show goes off the air. I am Ann Kiguta. Have a wonderful evening, and see you Thursday on Citizen Live at 9 in Opinion Court. But for now, good night. God bless. God bless Kenya.